For years, military analysts and politicians believed Canada's decision on its next-generation fighter jet was already written in stone. The F-35, America's trillion-dollar project, was seen as the inevitable choice. It carried the prestige of US technology, the backing of NATO allies, and the weight of political influence. Every sign pointed in one direction. But when Canada's decision was finally revealed, the entire world was left stunned. Against all odds, Canada chose the Swedish Gripen over the mighty F-35. The shocking truth behind this choice was not just about aircraft performance, it was about strategy, independence, and secrets that few dared to imagine. Behind closed doors, meetings stretched deep into the night. Canadian defense officials weighed classified reports, ran countless simulations, and listened to testimonies from pilots who had flown both machines. At first glance, the F-35 appeared unbeatable. It was stealthy, it was American, and it was marketed as the future of air dominance. But beneath the glossy brochures and flashy demonstrations, troubling realities began to surface. Costs spiraled out of control. Maintenance demands were staggering. Pilots whispered of limitations in real combat scenarios, where theory did not always match reality. Meanwhile, the Gripen stood quietly in the shadows. Sweden's single-engine fighter did not boast the same hype. It lacked Hollywood glamour. But those who examined it closely began to notice something strange. The Gripen's design emphasized adaptability. It could land and take off from highways, be maintained by small teams, and upgrade quickly with software patches rather than expensive overhauls. For Canada, with its vast territories, frozen landscapes, and limited defense budget, this flexibility was more than attractive. It was essential. But there was more, something almost hidden, that changed everything. Reports emerged that during secret joint exercises, the Gripen had performed far better than expected. In simulated dogfights, it surprised even seasoned F-35 pilots. Its electronic warfare systems were so advanced that they disrupted enemy radars in ways US officials never anticipated. The Gripen didn't just compete, it exposed weaknesses. That revelation was quietly buried, but Canada had seen it. Still, the political weight of the United States loomed large. Could Canada really turn its back on its closest ally? Pentagon officials were certain that Ottawa would not dare. Yet whispers began circulating in Canadian military circles. What if the very dependence on US technology was the real trap? What if choosing the F-35 meant surrendering sovereignty over Canada's skies? After all, every F-35 was linked to American systems, requiring Washington's approval for upgrades, modifications, even certain missions. In contrast, the Gripen offered independence. Sweden promised full technology transfer, something the US would never allow. The final decision was made in secrecy. Only a handful of top officials knew the truth before the announcement. When the news broke, Pentagon insiders were said to be furious. Defense contractors were shocked. Analysts scrambled to explain how the weaker Gripen had won. But for Canada, the choice was never just about buying a jet. It was about rewriting its future. And what lay beneath that choice was a story darker and more mysterious than anyone had imagined. Because hidden in Canada's evaluation reports was a detail so explosive it could shake the defense industry. A test result, quietly classified, showed that in certain scenarios, the Gripen not only outmaneuvered the F-35, it rendered its stealth advantage useless. How? That was the question no one dared to answer openly. Some believed it was the Gripen's electronic warfare suite. Others whispered of secret upgrades provided by Sweden in cooperation with unnamed partners. Whatever the truth, Canada had seen enough to make its shocking decision. The revelation about the Gripen's hidden edge spread quietly through Canadian defense circles, but never reached the public. Officially, the government's press release spoke of cost-effectiveness, maintenance advantages, and strategic independence. But behind those diplomatic words lay something far more startling. The classified reports described how the Gripen's advanced radar and electronic warfare system had in multiple exercises made stealth aircraft visible. If that were true, the foundation of America's trillion-dollar stealth program was suddenly in question. Imagine the implications. The F-35, touted as untouchable, might no longer be invisible on the battlefield. Canada knew that admitting such a truth would cause global chaos. Defense contractors worth billions could collapse overnight. NATO's entire strategy could be thrown into doubt. So the findings were buried, marked eyes only, and locked away in secure vaults. Yet those who saw the files could not unsee them. But there was another layer of mystery. Some Canadian officials hinted that Sweden was not acting alone. Rumors swirled of quiet collaboration between Saab and nations with deep expertise in electronic warfare, countries that preferred to remain in the shadows. One name surfaced more than once: Israel. Another whispered possibility was that Sweden had access to secret Russian systems through back channels, taken from conflicts where advanced radars were deployed. The evidence was never confirmed, but the technology in Gripen's latest variant seemed almost too advanced for a small nation to achieve alone. Pentagon insiders were furious. Calls were made to Ottawa. Pressure was applied. Promises and threats both delivered. How could Canada, a close ally, betray the United States in this way? Yet Canada stood firm, knowing that the alternative meant technological dependence forever tied to Washington. One Canadian general reportedly said in a closed-door meeting, "If we choose the F-35, we fly America's jet. If we choose the Gripen, we fly Canada's jet." That single sentence captured the heart of the decision. Still, the decision carried risks. Within days of the announcement, lobbyists unleashed a storm. Articles filled with leaked information suddenly appeared in major newspapers, criticizing Gripen's limited combat history. Former pilots were quoted, warning that Canada was taking a dangerous gamble. Social media was flooded with comparisons painting the Gripen as inferior. Yet, mysteriously, for every wave of criticism, new voices emerged, pointing to the hidden advantages of the Swedish jet, voices that seemed to know more than they should. Inside the Pentagon, something darker was brewing. Analysts began to revisit war games, searching for any signs they had overlooked. Had Gripen really exposed a flaw in the F-35? Quietly, a team was assembled to investigate. What they found only deepened the mystery. In multiple joint NATO exercises, results had been quietly altered before release. Officially, the F-35 always won. But in internal, unedited logs, there were cases where Gripen pilots had achieved multiple simulated kills against the supposedly invincible stealth jet. The discrepancies were deliberate, meant to protect the reputation of the F-35 program. If the F-35's flaws were hidden for years, how much else was being concealed? Could they trust a future where every defense choice was dictated by another nation's agenda? The Gripen was more than an aircraft. It was a statement of sovereignty. And yet, deep inside these events, there were whispers of something even more secret. Some claimed that during a highly classified exercise in the Arctic, Gripen aircraft had used a new type of electronic warfare suite that completely blinded not only enemy radars, but even confused satellites overhead. The logs of that exercise were immediately sealed, and those who participated were sworn to silence. But fragments of the truth leaked out, just enough to raise questions too dangerous to ask openly. By now, the story had become larger than a defense contract. Canada's choice was exposing cracks in the global military order. For decades, America had assumed its allies would fall in line, purchasing weapons not just for defense, but to reinforce US dominance. Canada broke that chain. And once one nation broke free, others began to wonder. If Gripen could outshine the F-35, why were they spending billions on a jet that might not even hold its promise? The Pentagon knew the danger of this narrative spreading. A desperate effort began to reassert control. Officials hinted that Canada's decision might be reversed. Secret offers of deeper military integration were made. But Canada remained silent. Behind the scenes, its Air Force prepared for a future few understood. One where the Gripen would not just defend Canadian skies, but perhaps reveal a truth the world was not ready to face. As the dust settled on Canada's shocking decision, the world watched closely. At first, many believed the storm would pass. Surely, under enough pressure, Ottawa would backtrack and fall in line with Washington. Yet days turned into weeks, and the choice remained firm. Canada had chosen Gripen. But what no one outside the inner circle realized was that this decision had set into motion a chain of events that could alter the balance of power. In secret hangars across Canada, the first Gripens began arriving for testing. Pilots who took the controls were astonished. They reported an ease of handling, a fluid responsiveness, and systems that felt tailored to Canada's vast, rugged geography. The jet's ability to land on highways and operate from remote locations wasn't just a feature. It was a revelation. Unlike the F-35, which required long, pristine runways and an army of maintenance crews, the Gripen could survive and fight in conditions Canada knew all too well: snow, ice, and wilderness. But there was still the matter of the classified technology. Rumors continued to swirl that Canada had been promised access to software codes, weapons integration rights, and systems that no other nation had been given. Sweden had quietly agreed to full transfer of technology, a gesture of trust that the United States had never offered. This meant that, for the first time in modern history, Canada would control the destiny of its own fighter fleet. No secret backdoors, no Washington approval for upgrades, true sovereignty. Yet, there was a price for such independence. Strange incidents began to unfold. A Canadian research facility linked to Gripen testing suffered a mysterious power outage. Pilots reported unusual interference in their communications during training flights. Analysts suspected cyber intrusions targeting Canada's new defense systems. While no one admitted it openly, many believed these were covert attempts to sabotage the Gripen program before it fully took root. Inside NATO, tensions grew. Allies who had already committed to the F-35 felt uneasy. If Canada's choice proved successful, their own multi-billion-dollar investments could suddenly appear reckless. Quietly, officials from other nations reached out to Sweden. asking questions that were never meant to be public. Was it true that Gripen's electronic suite could unmask stealth? Could it really outperform the F-35 in contested skies? Sweden remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. The mystery only deepened. Meanwhile, pilots who trained on the Gripen shared cryptic observations. One described the jet as alive, adapting instantly to threats in ways that felt almost predictive. Another hinted at classified features not listed in any brochure, systems that seemed to anticipate enemy movements before they happened. These stories were dismissed as exaggerations, but they spread quickly, feeding a legend that the Gripen was more than just a fighter. It was something the world had not yet fully understood. The Pentagon could no longer ignore it. Behind closed doors, high-level meetings acknowledged a dangerous reality. If Canada's Gripen fleet demonstrated undeniable superiority, the F-35 program's credibility would collapse. Trillions of dollars, decades of development, and the very foundation of U.S. aerial dominance were at stake. Some even speculated that if the Gripen's true capabilities became known, global defense alliances could shift overnight. The U.S. would lose not just contracts, but influence. And then came the most chilling whisper of all. A source inside Canada hinted that during one classified Arctic exercise, Gripen jets had detected and tracked objects that even NORAD's advanced radar systems had missed. These objects were not enemy aircraft, nor drones, nor anything on record. The Gripen had seen something beyond known technology. The data was quickly classified, labeled anomalous, and locked away. But the fact that Canada's new fighter could detect what the most expensive US systems could not raised unsettling questions. Was the Gripen simply a cheaper, more flexible jet? Or was it something far more disruptive, a machine that could expose truths the world was not ready for? For Canada, the answer no longer mattered. What mattered was control. For the first time in decades, the nation was free from technological dependence, free to shape its defense without another power's shadow. And so, while newspapers continued to debate costs and politics, the real story remained hidden. Canada had seen something in the Gripen that went beyond numbers, something shocking enough to break away from the most powerful defense industry in the world. The public would never know the full details. Not yet. Canada's choice was not just a purchase. It was a warning. The age of unquestioned US air dominance might be ending, and the mysterious truth behind the Gripen was only beginning to surface.